Okay, so picture this. A suburban housewife, more familiar with bake sales than bullet casings, decides to team up with one of the most hardened homicide detectives in LAPD history. This isn't some Hollywood movie pitch. This is the incredible, true story of Jigsaw and Jane and their 13-year journey through the absolute darkest corners of Los Angeles. I mean, the story is so wild that even professional reviewers call it surreal. And honestly, that's the perfect word for it. This isn't fiction, this is real life. It's about two completely different worlds colliding in the most unexpected way imaginable. It really makes you ask what a person is truly capable of when they decide to step way outside their comfort zone. So, who are we talking about here? Well, on one hand, you've got Jane Howatt. She's 37, a housewife, a mom, and an aspiring writer who's just looking for her big break. And then you've got John St. John, 64 years old, a giant of the LAPD they called Jigsaw. The difference is pretty simple. She was looking for a great story. He was the story. And what happens when those two worlds, the manicured lawns of suburbia and the gritty, rain-slicked crime scenes of the city, slam into each other? Well, you get a partnership that neither of them could have ever predicted, and one that would change both of their lives forever. So how does a journey like this even begin? You might think it starts in some shadowy back alley or a smoky detective's office. But for Jane, it all started right at her kitchen table, with the morning paper and a cup of coffee. Just like that, she's reading the paper and bam, a headline catches her eye. Detective John St. John getting an award for cracking one of the city's most terrifying serial killer cases. In that one moment, any plan she had to write a book about, of all things, tennis, gone. She knew right then and there this was the story she had to tell. But here's the thing. Getting access to a legend like Jigsaw wasn't as simple as just making a phone call. Oh no, it took some serious persistence. And it led to a first meeting that is, well, the stuff of legend itself. After getting the polite brush off again and again from the homicide squad, Jane just refused to give up. Her sheer tenacity finally wore them down, and Jigsaw agreed to meet. The place? Taylor's Steakhouse. The mission? To convince this legendary detective to let her, a totally unknown writer, tell his life story. No pressure, right? So try to put yourself in her shoes. Jane walks into this old-school steakhouse, and she's scanning the room. She's looking for a Hollywood super cop, right? Someone who just looks like he could take down a serial killer with his bare hands. She's expecting a movie star. So as she and her husband are sitting at the bar waiting, she starts this little running commentary, kind of whispering about the guys in the room, pointing out who couldn't possibly be the great Jigsaw St. John. She's critiquing their clothes, how they carry themselves, completely clueless about who might be listening. And here it is, the perfect punchline. That quiet, unassuming guy sitting right next to her at the bar, the one listening to her whole performance. Yep, that was Jigsaw. He was testing her before he'd even said a single word. Classic. And that little test tells you everything you need to know about who he was. Jigsaw wasn't some dirty, hairy type. He was more like Columbo. He had these rumpled suits and a fedora and this kind of ordinary, grandfatherly vibe that made people totally underestimate him. And that right there was his secret weapon. So that bizarre first meeting, it wasn't the end of the story. It was just the very beginning. The start of a 13-year partnership that would yank Jane from the safety of her suburban life and drop her right into the city's heart of darkness. But that brings up the biggest question of all, doesn't it? Jane herself admitted she was afraid of everything. So how in the world could someone like that survive in the world of homicide, a world filled with violence, death, and just unimaginable tragedy? In fact, her fear was so obvious at first that Jigsaw gave her a nickname. Get this, Miss Panic. He saw her shock, he saw her hesitation, but he must have also seen something else under all that, a kind of steel-like determination that just wouldn't quit. And man, she was going to need every ounce of that determination, because for the next 13 years, she wasn't just some observer on the sidelines. No way. She was there, at gruesome, bloody crime scenes, inside the morgue watching autopsies, meeting informants in dark alleys, walking the halls of maximum security prisons, and maybe toughest of all, sitting with families who were just completely destroyed by grief. She saw the whole thing. To really get a sense of what their work was like, we gotta look at a specific case. The investigation into a serial killer named William Bradford, it shows you just how sharp Jigsaw was and just how deep Jane had to go. So, Bradford's method was just cruel. He was an amateur photographer and he preyed on the Hollywood dreams of young women, promising them a modeling portfolio. But his real intention was murder. After bodies started showing up, a barmaid in an alley, a teenager out in the desert, Jigsaw started putting the pieces together one tiny clue at a time until he built a case so airtight, Bradford had no way out. And Jigsaw actually took Jane out to that crime scene in the Mojave Desert. And her words here, they really show you how much she changed. She wasn't just reporting facts anymore. She was standing in that desolate, frightening place, trying to feel the victim's final, terrified moments. She was becoming a witness. And a case like that, well, it was just one of many that helped build the legend of Jigsaw St. John, a legend that was symbolized by one single piece of metal. And what a legacy it was. His career spanned 43 years. I mean, just try to wrap your head around these numbers. We're talking about over 1,000 homicides solved, a dozen serial killers put behind bars for good. The sheer scale of his impact on Los Angeles is just staggering. And all of that work, all that dedication, it earned him badge number 1. Now, this wasn't just some random number. Inside the LAPD, having badge number 1 meant you were it. The best, the most respected. You were the peak of what a detective could be. But you know, even for legends, the road has to end somewhere. And for Jigsaw, it wasn't some dramatic shootout. At 75 years old, the department took away his car, calling him a driving liability. For a street cop whose brain was basically a map of every back alley in LA, losing his car was like losing his world. He wouldn't ride a desk, so he just retired. Cancer took his life 2 years later. But the detective in him never really retired. Even in his final days, he was still working on the one case that had haunted him his entire career, the Black Dahlia murder. A puzzle solver, right to the very end. Jane Howatt was an ordinary person who chose to step into an extraordinary world. Her journey with Jigsaw proves that the most incredible stories often come from the most unlikely partnerships. And it makes you wonder, right? What really happens when an ordinary life decides not to run from the darkness, but to walk straight into it? Well, you get the unforgettable story of Jigsaw and Jane.